Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with knowledge partners NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. We have a great guest and visitor today, and we're going to certainly look into the depths of corporate governance. Please welcome Dan Gallagher, who's the former SEC Commissioner and currently the President of Patomak Global Partners. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks for having me, yeah.
So you and I had, this is nothing new for us. We've had a couple of
Yes,
these
we
exchanges
have.
in
Yeah.
front of audiences. This one isn't live, but anyway, one of the first things I wanted to ask you, and since we're talking about governance, is recently we saw the Commonsense corporate governance principles come out by that very impressive group of business leaders, institutional investors, Warren Buffett. They came out with these set of principles that promote long-term thinking in the way of corporate governance to help American companies, retirees, investors. And all of a sudden there it was out there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of buzz about it. Everybody was talking.
Yeah.
But sort of everybody was asking the question, what happens now?
Yeah,
So
that's for sure.
I was reasonably sure that the SEC wasn't going to change its current path, and I was reasonably sure that Congress wasn't going to redo any of its regulations. But talk a little bit about, because of the significance of the creators of that, talk about what the reaction might be at the SEC when somebody sees these published common sense corporate governance principles.
Well, so first of all, I like you, I think was a bit surprised. They did a good job of keeping it closed before the document was released, and so it did have the intended effect of impressing folks, both in I think substance and in timing, and certainly with the composition of the group. You know, I think TK, and I've given speeches about this topic specifically during my time on the commission. I think that what the private community, meaning issuers and advisors and other intermediaries, what they're reacting to is a state of affairs where right now corporate governance is the third rail, where if you go and take a public position on any one issue, you're attacked by the other side of that issue. And because of that, regulators, policymakers who have in many instances created the situation that gives rise to the issues being debated, they don't want to engage, right? If they raise their head above the firing line, they're going to get shot. So the SEC in particular and Congress, putting aside what Congress did to corporate governance in Dodd-Frank, has been wholly silent on a lot of these issues, and quite frankly, where they've intervened, it's mostly been for the negative. And so I applaud the private sector generally for saying enough is enough, and we need to get some thoughts on the table to create a dialogue. And you know, I think the list that they put together is mostly commonsensical type things. I think myself, as much as I applaud them, I have a preference for the paper that Professor Subramanian at Harvard Business School and Law School put out, Corporate Governance 2.0. I think that paper to me was similar in vein. It just said, come on, stop all the screaming and sit down and let's hash something out. But different in that he actually put some things on the table that are a bit more controversial than what I think you saw in the principles for corporate governance. And so I don't want that to take away from their work, but I think if I had to pick between the two, I would take Professor Subramanian's.
Yeah, but even the professors and this one, none of them, there's no formal process now of what happens. These just sort of end up there.
That's right.
If you're a company, you can embrace these, okay? But there is nothing formal that happens. It just, they're out there now, and people can refer to them like you just referred to the professors.
That's right.
But
Yeah, and it's a shame. And again, I think it's given, I gave a whole speech about this at the Stanford Directors College last year before I left the commission, that, especially when you talk about activism or short-termism, if you take an issue on a position on any one of the issues involved, you're immediately categorized. Proactivist, anti-activist, short-termist, long-termist. I mean, it's really, anti-shareholder even. And it's unfair and it's unhealthy, because I've watched folks stand back from the debate because they don't want to get painted one way or the other.
Yeah. So we want to switch gears here just a little, and Dan, and look at sort of life after the SEC.
Yeah.
So you went and joined a organization, Patomak Global Partners. You're working with an old acquaintance,
That's right.
Another SEC person in Paul Atkins.
Right.
And Patomak, from my experience, offers counseling and strategic regulatory advice, which
That's
you
right.
would expect, risk management, compliance services, litigation, anything that sort of relates to the regulatory world. So that means you're going to end up sitting in a lot of boardrooms,
Yes, sir.
okay,
Yeah.
advising executive managements or boards of directors. So share with us, if you would, what you see when you go in. What are people challenged with, in the boardroom right now?
So, well, it's a great question, because I think there's a lot of chatter these days about the board, the composition of the boardroom dynamics. We talked earlier about the principles that were laid out. A lot of the principles go directly to both the composition and the function of the board. And so I think with all this chatter, and quite frankly with an enforcement atmosphere since the financial crisis that has been very critical of boards and board members, I think my sense in talking to folks since I've gotten to Patomak is that a lot of boards are nervous, and they're seeking best practices and guidance. They want to make sure that they're state of the art. They want to know how much they should be engaging with shareholders. That's the new thing, right? Engagement with shareholders. What does that mean in practice, and how often, and what can we say and not, and should it be intermediated through management and outside counsel, and all these tough questions, which I view as a general thing. You don't like it when the stimulus is a negative, right? When it's in enforcement, but quite frankly, I think it's been somewhat healthy, and for us at Patomak, it's great, because we've seen how these conversations go in the government. We know generally what the thought process is and what the views are, and so we're able to take that learning and knowledge and help companies, help the boards do a better job, make them more comfortable with respect to their practices, improve them where necessary. But there's no one specific thing. I mean, if you had to pick, of course, I would say cybersecurity, if you had to pick a discrete topic, but generally speaking, it's this all-around atmosphere of transparency and criticism in some ways of the role of boards, and so we go in and we can do all sorts of things at Patomak, which is great. We can talk to them about very specific things, right? The tenure issues, or policies and procedures that the board might have for communications with the management team and things like that. Or we can just go in and do a generalized, let's take a look at how you guys do business, and let's meet with management, let's meet with you, let's meet with other major stakeholders, and give you a sense of what we think, where you fall in the spectrum of public company boards.
Yeah. Well, there's no question that when somebody comes under regulatory scrutiny, though, not knowing the path that you're supposed to take
That's right.
can be very detrimental.
That's right.
So whether it's counsel, whether it's you guys,
That's right.
regardless, that is one lesson that you don't want to learn by yourself.
No.
You want to learn from other people's mistakes.
That's
and
right.
make sure that you have resources that can help you guide
exactly
you through
right.
the process.
And preferably you want to learn it before you have the problem, right? If you already have the problem, the issues are more discrete, the criticism's more harsh, and it's harder to work in a cooperative way to get at these issues. If you do it prophylactically, proactively, it's a much better context. And so I would recommend to any board, to any chairman, any CEO that hasn't put their board through a process, just a generalized evaluation, that it's a good time to do so.
Let me ask you, we just have a minute or two left,
Sure.
but I've always wanted to ask this question. So what would board members be surprised at? You took this position as the SEC commissioner, you go in. What would they be surprised at on what goes on behind closed doors versus probably what everybody's impression really is?
You know, it's a great question, and there are probably several answers, but the one that sticks out to me is I think that you always impute, or I do at least, to these official institutions, this knowledge and expertise, and obviously there's a lot of that at the SEC, both on the commission and the staff. But when put to it, when an issue arises, and when the commissioners get together, we're just human beings too. We have processes and the like, but at the human element, when we sit around and talk issues through, it's the same as that board members are experiencing in the boardroom. We're not always agreeing. The dissension or disagreement, even mild disagreement, is healthy for the overall conversation. Yeah. That when you recognize that somebody who you vastly disagree with on something has a valid point, and you factor that into your decision making, the outcome, even if it's not a unanimous decision, is usually a better one. And so I think they'd be surprised to see that the agency doesn't have all the answers all the time. There's no checklist for commissioners that says if X, do Y. And there's all too little, I think, interaction amongst the commissioners. Most of the work of the commission is intermediated by the professional staff. But when we do get together, they'd be surprised to see, I think, how like a boardroom it is, and make them feel a little better probably about some of the thornier discussions they have in the boardroom.
Well, Dan Gallagher, it's always a pleasure to have you on. It's always good to get us an inside look to the SEC, and we'll certainly have to have you back, because
I'd love it.
We'll have plenty of questions that sort of emanate out of that regulatory body that we'll want to know the answers to. So thanks for taking the time to join us. And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.